And joining him are esteemed panelists. And as I say your name, I invite you up onto the stage. Anita Prakash, Senior Policy Advisor at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, Jakarta. Can I welcome you to the stage? Anita brings extensive experience in trade and investment policy with a focus on enhancing connectivity in Southeast Asia, East Asia, and India. Welcome. Ambassador Peresami Kumaran, Special Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs. Can I welcome you to the stage? Please give him a big round of applause. A Friday evening round of applause, people. Thank you. He's renowned for his diplomatic acumen and strategic insights, particularly in fostering international cooperation and relations. And finally, we have Dr. Alvita Singh Ningtojam. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Alwhite. Okay, sorry, Dr. Alwhite. Welcome. He's Assistant Professor at Symbiosis School of International Studies, Pune, a seasoned expert in international affairs, specializing in geopolitical dynamics and counter-terrorism efforts in the South Asian region. So together, our panelists will navigate the complexities of IMEC, exploring its economic and geopolitical implications and shedding light on its transformative potential for the interconnected regions of Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Ajit, over to you.
Thank you, Vandana, and good afternoon, folks. From drones to electric cars and cybersecurity, we get to the more mundane stuff like geopolitics and geoeconomics. And I'm delighted to have with us a really distinguished panel. I just want to tell you how difficult it is to maneuver the complicated ways of geopolitics. And when it gets complicated further by intertwining with geoeconomics, it's not easy. So we need experts to help us understand. Just to give you a flavor, our Prime Minister went to a great welcome and inauguration of a very grand Hindu temple in the Emirates. That's one development, recent development. After a lot of back and forth, we were able to get 8 of our Navy men discharged who were on death row. I'm told they were to be sentenced, hanged to death. And they've been acquitted and they're back from Qatar. I think it speaks something about Indo-Qatar relationships. We also have been, I'm told, exporting labor to Israel and export of drones. I think that also says something about the relationship. And I could go on. So if you're trying to make sense of exactly, how does this align, this has bearing on this discussion today. As Vandana said, this session is on the Indo-Middle East Economic Corridor, right? IMEC, IMEC, let's call it. And it's an announcement which was made just before, during India's presidency of the G20. It's a very ambitious announcement and initiative. It involves something like more than 2,000 kilometers of railroad, but it's a combination of rail, road, and even sea, not just transportation linkage, but communication. As I think Vandana mentioned, it's also digital linkage. And it is, some people say, and hopefully this will come out in the discussion, perhaps it is India's foray into trying to be a counter to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched in 2013, to which 150 countries signed up, not India. And so we will see what the panelists have to say about that. And as we speak, so this was signed, I think, in September 2023. But unfortunately, on October 7th, the events of October 7th and subsequent events have thrown a big question mark and a cloud over this thing, because the IMEC, which is the signatories to IMEC, include Saudi Arabia, the European Union, Italy, France, Germany, USA, and Israel. And it somewhat seems to be predicated on cordial relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But the events of October 7th and subsequent events, even as we speak, they are putting a big cloud on the prospects for normal and cordial relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which are sort of which are a prerequisite, if I may say so, for the IMEC initiative to succeed. In fact, it's not just me. I believe President Biden, Joe Biden, said something which the U.S. authorities have backtracked immediately. But he alleged that the Hamas attack was driven by the desire to derail the desire for both Saudis and the Israelis to normalize the relations. So we don't know. So this is just to give you a flavor that geopolitics is not easy to kind of understand. So the structure of the discussion is that I'm going to request Ambassador Kumaran to go first and with his initial remarks. Then I'll ask Ms. Anita Prakash to give her comments, and then Dr. Alved Alwai. And then we will have a round of discussion, and then we will have everybody else participating. So can I request Ambassador Kumaran, maybe about 10 minutes?
Moderator of the session, Dr. Ajit Ranade. Thank you. My fellow panelists, Anita Prakashji and Dr. Alvite, distinguished guests, invitees, good afternoon. Let me, before I get into the topic, which is the IMEC, whether it's a new spice route, let me try and give you a few preambular comments on the various dimensions of connectivity and the kinds of connectivity that we normally encounter, so that we can set this whole idea of IMEC in context. We, of course, talk very often about transport connectivity when what we understand about connectivity in general is transport connectivity, be it road, rail, ports, air connectivity, etc. But we also have other kinds of connectivity, for example, economic and trade connectivity. This involves business-to-business connectivity, supply chains connectivity enabled by free trade agreements, links between technological and research ecosystems, servicification of goods trade, which could involve connectivity with neighboring countries and regions, tourism connectivity, healthcare tourism, education, people studying in areas other than their own, talent and skills mobility, that is also a kind of connectivity, special economic zones and export promotion zones, taking advantage of subsidies, preferential trading arrangements, trade facilitation measures, reduced trade barriers, and also simplified customs procedures. We also have financial connectivity, which involves linking payment systems and shared DPI, digital public infrastructure platforms. For example, ONDC, that is still in the process of developing and refinement to expand cross-border e-commerce. We also have the idea of connected financial markets, connected stock exchanges, etc. All this in general form financial connectivity. We also have digital and data connectivity. This could involve fiber optic links through undersea data cables, cross-border movement of data. This is something that involves regulation. We also have something called regional data centers and a new idea of data embassies. We'll try and talk about it later if we get a chance. We also have digital partnership agreements. The ASEAN and some other European countries are very keen pursuers of such agreements. These are often seen as digital equivalents of FTAs. We also have, in this sense, regulatory convergence to deal with data. We have also regionalization of startup ecosystems. That is also a kind of connectivity. We are also, we've also come across energy connectivity, which involves regional and cross-border power grids. The Prime Minister often talks about the one sun, one world, one grid approach. which involves connecting grids across a vast set of geographies, all the way, for example, from Vietnam to Morocco, which can take advantage of multiple time zones and therefore maximize the hours of sunlight available. It can also integrate multiple sources of renewable energy to try and deal with the problem of intermittency that renewable energy suffers. We also often talk about integration of energy policies, cross-border energy delivery and trade. We know it in our own region, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Bhutan. We also talk about linked markets for renewable energy networks, again in our region. Very often, and this is an aspect that is not discussed very much, security connectivity. Security creates the foundation for the trust required for larger connectivity and cooperation that flows from it. This can involve, in some sense, a broader convergence of security perspectives and security considerations, the need to together find approaches to combat transnational crimes and terrorism, smuggling, narcotics, trafficking, etc., through improved border management techniques and border infrastructure. So with these preambular remarks, let me try and come back to the main topic, which is IMEC. As Dr. Ranade pointed out, the announcement on the IMEC was made at a special event on the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII, co-chaired by Prime Minister Modi and US President Biden on the sidelines of the G20 summit on 9th September 2023. The MOU, of course, was signed by India, USA, Saudi Arabia, UAE, European Union, Italy, France, and Germany. Notably, the participating countries constitute 40% of the world's population and roughly about 50% of the world's economy, amounting to about $47 trillion. Such connectivity was also proposed earlier at the I2U2 inaugural virtual meeting held in July 22. And the ITU2, as you all probably know, is India, Israel, UAE, and the US. Dr. Ranade again pointed out that the dynamics in the Middle East are complicated, but they keep shifting. Unthinkable in the past for a group such as I2U2 to be formed, which brings together the UAE and Israel on one platform. So clearly we were moving in a direction that is very positive and something that India could benefit from. And recent developments, of course, have complicated matters, but I'll come back to it shortly. The other important point here is that the linkage with PGII, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, secures US buy-in for this ambitious IMEC corridor. By way of background, PGII is a US-sponsored initiative that was announced during the 48th G7 summit held in Germany in June 2022. It is supported by the Build Back Better World, B3W framework. It aims to narrow the infrastructure gap in lower and middle income countries and accelerate progress on sustainable development goals. It basically envisions construction of transformative economic corridors, and the IMEC certainly fits that description, and promotion of infrastructure investments that can boost and ensure economic development across multiple countries and sectors. The PGII already has helped in terms of supporting corridors in the Balkans, in the Caribbean, and also to develop resilient infrastructure in the small island developing states. Let me try and point out a few key features of IMEC. The MOU basically brings out some kind of political commitment on the part of the participants. It does not create any rights or obligations at this stage. My understanding is that the details will be thrashed out on the basis of further negotiations between the stakeholders. It basically calls for the establishment of a 4,800 kilometers long corridor, including a network of railway lines, ship-to-rail transit routes, designed to supplement existing maritime road transport routes and also enable goods, services, and also transit between India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and Europe. It involves a northern and eastern corridor. We've already heard of the basic details. It connects India to the Middle East, multiple countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, UAE, all the way to southern European ports on the Mediterranean. Basically, the initial points highlighted are Marseille in France, Messina in Italy, and Piraeus in Greece. The broad objectives have been identified as unlocking greater investment for infrastructure development, strengthening the various dimensions of connectivity. That's the reason why I highlighted the various dimensions, to promote transformative economic integration and creating inclusive economic, social, and environmental impact. In addition to catalyzing more trade and manufacturing capacities along the corridor, it also envisages export of clean energy through hydrogen pipelines, laying undersea optic fiber cables for high-speed internet, and an alternative route for telecom connectivity in order to de-risk other potential options like the transatlantic, trans-Pacific cables, etc. Linking energy grids to expand reliable access to electricity. Again, I referred earlier to the one sun, one world, one grid approach that we pursue. Facilitating also investment in R&D for advanced clean energy technologies. The MOU called for the signatories to meet in the next 60 days to take forward further discussions. Unfortunately, that could not happen due to developments in Israel and Gaza. We hope that at some point we can pick up the threads and take the discussions forward. The estimated corridor is expected to, the cost of the corridor is estimated at about $20 billion. This involves laying a rail network, contiguously supported by a state-of-the-art optic fiber network and the hydrogen pipeline that I mentioned. Initially, the existing UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan rail network, augmented by the construction of a 300 km further railway line connecting Amman with Haifa port in Israel, is planned to be operationalized. There are three industrial corridors envisaged, namely food, green energy, and knowledge economy. Of course, the details will be thrashed out. Now, why is this very important? What is the big deal about IMEC? The key point is that it is the shortest trade route connecting India and Europe. It reduces time by 40% and cost by about 30% if we get the various pieces right, compared to the existing Suez Canal route. It is designed to support seamless movement of goods through a single digitized trade document and harmonized transport rules. This, of course, involves a lot of work through multiple government agencies in India and the other participating countries, and also the private sector. Congestion and accidents in the Suez Canal, of course, cause significant disruptions, as we've seen in recent years. Recent attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea region have also shown that excessive reliance on the Suez Canal has its risks. Transport through that route has recently fallen by nearly 40%. It therefore makes a strong case for us to develop an alternative route to de-risk supply chains and logistics. Of course, there will be competition from other similar corridors that are envisaged by various actors. Dr. Ranade mentioned about BRI, and of course the China Central Asia West Asia Economic Corridor as part of that, the new Eurasian land bridge, etc. And observers also point out the fact that Turkey, Egypt, and Iran are not part of the IMEC and stand to lose from it. But my argument would be that we initially have to make the case for the benefits that come out of IMEC, and gradually the number of participants would increase, and we will probably end up making a self-sustaining argument in favor of IMEC. Initially, IMEC, of course, was conceived as a catalyst for political normalization between GCC countries and Israel. And recent developments thereafter have complicated matters, as I noted earlier. However, my sense is that the situation in the region is extremely dynamic, and at some point we may see the return of favorable conditions. And until then, we continue to be involved in discussions, implementing the corridor in a phased manner, and paving the way and supporting the arguments for a broader accommodation. We are already engaged in discussions to fund the investment and also the governance mechanism for the IMEC corridor. There are various parties involved, US financial markets, the EU financial markets, and of course the GCC sovereign wealth funds. India and the UAE have already signed a framework agreement for empowerment and operation of the IMEC. RITES and Abu Dhabi ports have signed an MOU. We also have arguments that support energy security in India, opportunities for large project and service exports, interconnecting significant markets, production centers, logistics corridors, and creating another major transport corridor and a multi-dimensional transport corridor that links Indian markets to the others as India grows and emerges as a large manufacturing center. In fact, setting up a logistics corridor also enhances attractiveness of promoting India as a manufacturing location. Of course, we need to get the other pieces right, including the network of FTAs that we are negotiating, and the policies that we need to get right to make India a competitive manufacturing center. I think I'll leave it at that. I may have comfortably exceeded 10 minutes, but I'll come back to some of the other points later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kumaran. Thank you. I just want you to keep in mind some of the key things you mentioned. $20 billion is the investment. We don't know who is going to make it, but that's one number. Egypt and Iran are not yet part of IMEC. Just keep this for when you ask your questions. Sir, even Turkey is not part of it. The Haifa to Piraeus sea link is through Turkish waters. He also mentioned UAE. By the way, UAE is India's, I think, in the top 3 trading partners already. So that's a very strong linkage. And you mentioned 30%, 40% less time and 30% less cost, but we'll take you on that because I'm not clear. And one important thing you mentioned is this is supposedly a very visionary thing as an alternative to Suez, which which is a really fantastic thing. So, Anita Prakash.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajit. So Ambassador Kumaran has already pointed out the several challenges that are there in IMEC, and no doubt it is a very ambitious program. So where are the immediate solutions and where are the longer term solutions? For that, we need to put IMEC in some kind of a perspective. And here, I would like to give an example from our experience in how infrastructure connectivity has worked on the eastern side of, eastern flank of India. That is to say, in Southeast Asia and East Asia. Most of us here know that Southeast Asia and East Asia have all the Asian tigers and several other economies which have actually left poverty behind and worked up their way into the middle-income countries or lower middle-income countries. So all these are actually success stories. And therefore, connectivity per se has a distinct Asian origin to it, which is a slightly different version of the way the movement of goods, services, people, and finance is dealt with in Europe, where it is an absolute freedom, and for which several years of policy processes have gone into, and several domestic sacrifices have been made. Asia practices a freer version of movement of goods, services, people, finance not as much. And for that, then, infrastructure and institutional continuity or connectivity is the way it has been practiced here. And I believe that IMEC, at least in the shorter run, has to practice this kind of understanding of connectivity. That is to say, it cannot be a geographically contiguous program or a plan from the very outset. And fact of the matter also is that the new economic architecture in Indo-Pacific is also predicated on similar lack of geographically contiguous arrangements, which is why we have even regions like EU or UK participating in the Indo-Pacific architecture. That having been said, closer home, we have to look at our own experience when we are working on the trilateral highway. Ambassador Reddy is here, Ambassador Mohan Kumar is here, and they all are aware of this very, very ambitious program that is there. And one single gap in this very, very practical program, and I mean Myanmar here, and some smaller gaps in Laos and Cambodia, have prevented us from operationalizing this very, very fine connectivity program in which all natural elements of institution, manufacturing, and supply chains were present. So, and I don't even refer to China here, because please note that China's centrality in the supply chains of Asia was actually predicated on Asia's internal connectivity first, that is to say Southeast Asia and East Asia. And later, of course, China built upon its own domestic connectivities. So therefore, whether this kind of a unique understanding of connectivity can actually be transported into IMEC also, ASEAN played a very important institutional role in the Eastern experience of connectivity. Can we have a similar similar institution playing an important role? Can GCC take upon this important role that ASEAN has done? And going further, I would like to caution on one point at least, and this responsibility is upon all of us, to not tout IMEC as a game changer and as an alternative to BRI. BRI by itself was predicated on some very, very inefficient economics, and it was actually a modernization program and a bilateral program in which existing or historical infrastructure connectivities were modernized. The de novo projects were, let me put it very mildly, are not financial successes. And if if IMEC is to be touted as a kind of an alternative to BRI, that's a very wrong analogy to even begin with. What IMEC can be, the argument can be brought into favor of IMEC and get the policy conversation mature on this, is by championing IMEC as the provider of the alternate and diversified and resilient supply chains among trustworthy countries. Please, Ajit, just winding up, I will also like to remind here that China got itself connected to Europe through its ambitious railways program, but the largest part of that program is a subsidized one where wagons come back empty on one side. So to anything, any infrastructure connectivity is being done for the sake of it, may not go that far. And final point, Ajit, is that while working on IMEC, perhaps it may also be a good idea to touch base again with EU and look into their own program where EU introduced the building blocks for connectivity with Asia, which is which has actually done a lot of homework on how institutions and legal and regulatory conformities can also be put in place. So I'll stop here, Ajit, sure, and we'll come back for more.
Thank you. Thank you. You can tell that Anita Prakash is not a diplomat. She was already referring to BRI in the past tense. She was saying BRI was this and BRI was that. And even though her board has, one member of the board is a country called China, But anyway, thank you for being frank about it. Before we go to Dr. Alwai, I want to ask one question because it's related. See, what was not mentioned, but I think is implicit. So her main thrust was, let's learn from the connectivity successes of ASEAN and East Asia and so on. But madam, the biggest thing is that there was a peace dividend. All these countries are not fighting each other. Our rail route cannot even go through Pakistan. We have to go through some Jebel Ali. So surely the peace that exists in the Southeast Asia is a big contributory factor to its success. Wouldn't you say so?
Yes, and Ajit, I had kept this point for a later part of today's session, but since you have mentioned it, I must tell you that the funding aspects were largely taken care of by Japan. The peace was, security was underwritten by US, and to some extent, lesser degree EU.
ASEAN is 50 years old, right?
Yeah. So Europe also.
European Union is breaking up after 50 years. I mean,
no, some elements of security was underwritten by Europe also,
okay.
But similar coalition of funding and securitization, those also have to be built in, but later.
One very quick answer, if you can give a short answer to this. Who provided the funding for the infrastructure? You said that, I mean, why should Indian taxpayers pay for a highway in Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia? So who paid for the connectivity infrastructure?
That's a very interesting question. So as you know, Asia-Pacific was a post-war construct. And Japan had to pay a lot of reparations in that region. So part of the reparations were actually transferred into building of roads, which later got transformed in utilization as production networks. So there is a historical element to it.
So because IMEC $20 billion, we need to figure out who's going to pay for it. Dr. Alwai.
Hello.
Yeah, we have a mic here also.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to Pune International Center for giving me this opportunity to speak a few words about IMEC, and particularly to Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, who called me one evening and imposed on me that you have to speak, and you have no choice. Thank you, sir, for giving me this platform to speak on a subject. Yeah, to be very honest, I was a little skeptic to be a part of this dialogue because I have never dealt with so much of economics and technology. I've been mostly looking at military diplomacy and foreign policy, that too very traditional sort of a topic. But when it comes to a little bit of Middle East and what we are doing in the region, I have taken up the pledge to be a part of this program. Since yesterday, we have been hearing a lot about different kinds of diplomacy, different kinds of activities which are being carried out by different countries. If you look at the current international order or the international system, economic diplomacy, tech diplomacy, and now I can also put in corridor diplomacy or connectivity diplomacy has become an important pattern of some of the countries' foreign policy objectives. That also applies to countries like India, where we are looking on both sides of the frontiers how to expand our networks in terms of connectivity and corridor projects. The reason why I'm saying this is because if we look at the trajectory of the Indian foreign policy, particularly since 2014, this is not to say that we haven't done anything before 2014. And when it comes to a region like the Middle East or West Asia, there has been a significant improvement in terms of our visibility of what we are doing in the region, moving beyond the traditional oil and energy trade. Now the relationships have become a lot more comprehensive and significant than how it used to be before. Also adding into the elements of security, we can see that with countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia particularly, with the exception of countries like Israel, with whom we have been trading in defense products, and Oman, considered to be one of the strongest defense partners. But when it comes to the IMEC, Sir has given a very brief primer of what IMEC is all about. If we go back to a little bit of the history of IMEC, sometime in 2017, if we look at the geopolitics of West Asia or the Middle East, there were some signals coming out from Israel, particularly in 2017, when the former Israeli intelligence and transportation minister, Israel Katz, talked about reviving the ancient Hejaz railway network, particularly in Saudi Arabia, connecting, the port of Haifa, which Sir talked about, and then parts of Amman in Jordan, and then go down all the way to Medina. That was a proposal which was floated by the former Israeli minister in some of the forums in the region, and also that was the time when even Benjamin Netanyahu traveled to Oman to visit the former Sultan Qaboos. That had given some sort of a hint about the geopolitical realignments which was going on in the region, particularly between Israel and some of the, you call it moderate Sunni countries. That includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and one major factor was Iran, and at the same time, you have other economic incentives of merging together. Then we have seen the discussions during the I2U2 discussions about the possibility of coming out with a kind of a corridor project that would include some of the countries mentioned by Sir and Ranade Sir also at the introductory remarks. Uh, the corridor still very much in its initial inception stage, and I would agree in saying that, in believing that it's a very ambitious project. But I, for one, would not write off the effectiveness of this project because there are lots of intents, very strong desires in the intents coming out from various countries to push these projects towards fruition, not to leave it in between because of many challenges that we are seeing in the region. The corridor project holds significant geopolitical and economic implications, particularly at this juncture when economic diplomacy and connectivity has been given due importance by not only by India but also by the partners from Europe, also by the partners from the region. The reason why I'm saying this is because if you look at the current geopolitics, again, particularly in the Gulf region, there is also a kind of a look east policy being adopted by these countries to warm up to some of the strong economies in Asia. That includes India, China, Malaysia, Singapore, then East Asian countries like Japan, South Korea. And then they would like to build more economic partnerships, knowing that there would be some economic dividends or returns, particularly by getting closer to growing economies like India. So this is a kind of very strong intent. If you see the kind of visits and I would say the optics that have been coming out of our prime ministerial or any sort of a high-level visits, the intents seem to be very strong and very discernible in the last few years. So that's precisely the reason why I'm saying that it is too early, because many of the write-ups that we have seen, the moment this corridor was announced, people have already related it with many challenges. Of course, there are many challenges that we need to keep in mind, and some of them already have been flagged, particularly the BRI or the non-inclusion of some key countries like Iraq, or, Turkey from the region, and at the same time, what's happening right now in the region in terms of Hamas-Israel conflict and the ramifications that we are already seeing in the region. So these are challenges, but at the same time, what needs to be kept in mind is while we are waiting for these challenges to ebb down or to ease down, there are fair requirement of groundworks to be done by some of these countries in terms of improving on their existing infrastructure in order to make this corridor a lot more effective. We already have identified many ports in India. There are several ports in UAE, especially two of them, Jebel Ali Port and Al Jubair Port, and we have Haifa. And then if you recall some of the speeches given by the dignitaries who came from Europe, particularly the Prime Minister of Greece, who was the chief guest at the Raisina Dialogue, he talked about this corridor as a supercharged corridor, and also extending full support to use the port of Piraeus to be the entry-exit point for this corridor. So I'll leave it here, then we can go into the further discussions.
So I'm going to go to Ambassador. Thank you, Dr. Alvai. Ambassador Kumaran, so your initial remarks were extremely straight batting, no crooked shots. So I'm going to give you a crooked ball, googly. The diplomats, they never say no, but they don't always mean yes. So. See, you mentioned that this corridor has economic benefits, but is it really fair to say that it's motivated by a reaction to BRI? Anita Prakash says, don't think about BRI. It's like don't think about pink elephants, but everybody's thinking about pink. So Is it really in reaction to BRI that this thing came up?
Sure. Let me try and take it as directly as I can. Well, yes, the BRI was an idea put forward by China. It aims at taking advantage of China's manufacturing capacities, helping the Chinese economy develop further into the future, hardwiring connectivity in many dimensions with China so that the others also develop shared interests in China's growth and hope to grow with it. But IMEC is something that exemplifies the idea of disruption. You know, just because somebody is manufacturing an electric vehicle, it doesn't stop me from entering that industry. I may have a better idea. I may think my idea of competing product is better. So why not? Our understanding is that IMEC offers a viable alternative. We think that as far as India is concerned, it sets up hardwired connectivity in multiple dimensions in a way that gets others, key partners like the US, because PGII is a US initiative. They are looking for interesting alternate ideas to promote connectivity, promote trade, promote investment, develop infrastructure in a way that helps friend shoring, if you will. So you connect friends in a way that helps them share prosperity, connects them together. And for us, it helps us, we are a part of one end of the corridor. It also helps us promote our neighborhood first policy. If we can connect some of our neighbors with whom we are already undertaking sub-regional connectivity initiatives. I would say it is a perfect
on its own also it's a good
idea.
idea, without reference to BRI on its own. But the routing is so complicated. It's you go by ship up to Jebel Ali, and then you go by rail, and then you go. I just mentioned. So do you want to comment on this? You mentioned that Iran and Egypt are not part of this alliance, and you have to deal with Straits of Hormuz. And what if they're not happy about it? And then the other thing is that when you go from Haifa to Piraeus, you have to go through Turkish waters which belong to Turkey, and they're not part of this. So do you see? I know that it's very easy to point out challenges to IMEC, but we must face them, right? I mean, it's not. I'm not. So
this is very interesting, and I'm very tempted to take you back to what happened multiple centuries ago. When ships did not have a steel hull, and we were mostly limited to wooden ships, dhows with mostly coast-hugging routes. The Middle East was a very important player in the East-West trade corridors. Small ships used to go along the coast to the Middle East. Camel caravans used to take it across the Arabian Peninsula all the way to Turkey and further on to Europe. The invention of steel-hulled ships, which could go into deep waters, that undermined this traditional East-West trading route, and therefore Europeans developed the confidence to cross the Atlantic, travel across Africa, and go deep water into India, all the way to India and further to Southeast Asia for silk and spices, all the way to China, etc. But the development of the Suez Canal changed this again, and therefore they developed a shorter route, etc. So all the time, new developments tend to disrupt existing trade routes.
Optimistic that we should be able to deal with any difficulty we may face from the Haifa to Piraeus and Jebel Ali.
We are optimistic, and I think we will start by putting some pieces of this corridor together. As the benefits become more and more obvious, it will become a self-sustaining virtuous cycle, which will attract more participants to this corridor.
I'm going to come to Anita Prakash, but since you are on the spot and you served in Pakistan as well, you see at one point we were very optimistic about the Iran, IPI, Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline, gas pipeline. And just one or two incidents has just come, we have forgotten about that. Do you think something like that is something we need to remember?
Sure. I mean, we have to remember everything that we learn from every other experience. I mean, there's no doubt about it. IPI did not work because of geopolitical considerations. It basically depends a lot on how our relationship with Pakistan is going and whether we are able to invest sufficient trust in a pipeline that increases our dependence on Pakistan. I'm not sure we ever reached that point. and therefore the logic was not convincing enough to take the idea of that pipeline far ahead enough. TAPI, of course, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, also did not take off because of conditions in Afghanistan that were unstable for many, many years. But if geopolitics changes in a way that suddenly makes such ideas more exciting, surely all of that can come back to the table.
So I'm tempted to ask you more questions, but Anita Prakashi, tell us about the peace dividend. That you see, I mentioned European Union because we have had Brexit, and we have had people, some countries in sort of the eastern part questioning. There have been elections fought on the issue of whether to exit European Union or not. On the other hand, the ASEAN unification is still going stronger. I don't think there's any talk at all of breaking away from. So what is this? What is the secret of this peace and stability in East Asia, which is also 50 years old, and it's also a mix of highly, very less developed countries like CMLV, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam, and then Singapore and Brunei. So, is there something to be learned from their peace dividend, or how they maintain the peace?
Yeah, thanks, Ajit. That's a very great observation. And I would like to elaborate on that. And in fact, from CLMV, the V is out now, and Timor-Leste is now in, so it is now CLMT. Vietnam, just for your information, is now the second largest exporter from ASEAN, just after Singapore. So that is yet another green flag. That has to be...
That's also a peace dividend. Vietnam's success.
And a peace dividend and a model of cooperation where hand-holding from both sides is going on. And so Biden visits Vietnam, and just after Biden, after 15 days, Xi Jinping also visits Vietnam. But yeah, to come back to your main question, indeed, the peace dividend is very important, but more important than that, the fact that Asia, developing Asia, and even smaller, the LDCs, CLM would not have been what they are today. Myanmar, of course, is undergoing a kind of turbulence, but I speak of Myanmar before the junta came in this round. The fact that out of the community building process, if LDCs can actually increase their incomes by participating in a community building process, and rising stars like Vietnam, that itself is a great incentive. Even a landlocked LDC like Laos can aspire, can chair the ASEAN as it is happening in this year. So this process of inclusive development is something which ASEAN has put on table for other parts of the developing world. Of course, in this process, some of the larger dialogue partners of ASEAN have been very helpful, and I come back again to a very, very pioneering role of Japan in this, and to a larger extent, Korea also, in terms of manufacturing capacities. So yes, there are lessons.
Yeah, I think these parts of the world should actually stand out as an example.
Yeah, and linked to this is my first observation in today's presentation was not to see IMEC, and somewhat echoing what Ambassador said, is not to look at IMEC, at least in the shorter run, as a geographically contiguous program of cooperation, but rather than where it can work among the trusted partners.
Dr. Alwai, a question for you from geopolitical point of view, that do you think the Middle East can afford to alienate China, because they have very strong linkage? And if the Chinese take it as an affront that you guys are going too enthusiastically about IMEC, and secretly behind the scenes, if some pressure is brought to bear?
So that's a very interesting question. If we look at the trajectory of, again, the Chinese involvement in the Middle East, it's not a new terrain for them. They have come dealing with the region from the 70s, 80s onwards, particularly with the four modernization drive, technology, defense, agriculture, and academics and culture. So Middle East was very much in their, within their lens. If you look at the current scenario, one of the major drivers of China's relations with the Middle Eastern countries, particularly the Gulf countries, is energy. The bulk of the energy goes from the Gulf countries and that is something which they do not want to lose out on. If we compare and they are also very mindful of what they can do and what the Americans can do and what we also can do. I think this sort of an understanding are also there in the minds of the leaderships in the Gulf countries, because they are also kind of balancing the relationship between the US and the kind of a security guarantee which the Gulf countries expect from the US cannot be the same thing from China. But having said that, there is also a gradual visibility that the Chinese are also heading towards improving its military security relationships with the Gulf countries. If we see the investments coming in from China to the Gulf countries and vice versa, it's still very huge. The bilateral trade between China and GCC is about 320 something billion by 2022, which is a huge amount, and they cannot afford to lose that. And in the recent times, the nature of the relationship is going a lot more into technological aspects, which the Gulf countries really want. And at the same time, the GCC countries are also looking for a post-hydrocarbon future.
Yeah, that's right.
That takes to a newer level, and we already are aware of what kind of a roles China is playing in terms of something which we already have discussed before the session about the electric vehicles and the kind of resources that they have in that regard, which Saudis or the Emiratis or any other West Asian countries would want to. I would say that it's still a very complicated situation, and nobody would like to give up on one another at this moment.
Can I also add something,
Sure,
Dr. Anade? It's very interesting that you see that as something that is a binary choice. The imperative is that we need to make a positive case in favor of IMEC. And those will involve elements such as the fact that India will be a key piece in driving the next phase of growth, given the fact that we still have a lot of room for economic growth, the fact that we have a favorable geopolitical situation coalescing in favor of our interests in many ways, the fact that we have a young population, our economy has multiple engines firing, and so on. It can't be it can't be on the basis of an argument that somebody choose option A over option B, etc. I think the case has to be essentially the fact that we think that we are going to grow well in our Amrit Kal for the next 25 years, and it would be a good idea for you to link your bandwagon to ours, connect yourself well to us, that you can also benefit from it.
Yeah, this is a point which I often like to make, and thank you. It gives me a cue to mention it again. You see, the rise of India does not cause any anxiety in the world. Whereas the rise of China over the last 22 decades has always been a source of some apprehension, some anxiety, some discomfort, whatever it is. So far, but India is, this amazing pivot on Ukraine. We still don't publicly condemn Russian invasion. In Israel, even though the International Court of Justice is, so many countries have voted, but so it's a very amazing diplomacy. I mean, thanks to your community that we seem to be in this situation where somehow the rise of China is not seen as threatening the world order. In fact, it's seen as benign and something that everybody should. So, rise of India, okay, same thing. So I want to, we need to know, yeah, sure, but we will go to the questions now.
Just one very brief point, Ajit, adding to that, is that in this IMEC conversation, we should actually bring the conversation back to, just as there is an ASEAN centrality in Southeast Asia and East Asia, we have to bring the conversation back to India's centrality in the Eastern and Western connectivity. And since our organization is a research organization, so part of our job is advocacy. And this advocacy that even if there are still policy overhangs in India, but you cannot, the global finance and the global supply chains cannot keep waiting for that perfect landing zone in India. That advocacy actually must emerge from India's leadership in the IMEC conversation.
I know.
So there is a huge
Very,
task
very,
for
very
us
true.
also.
No, India is actually, it was signed in India. It was signed, the declaration was signed here. So clearly India is, and I think some of the $20 billion investment is perhaps India will proactively make that. And you mentioned the Partnership for Global Investment in Infrastructure, the PGII. It's a G7 initiative, but some of that money will. We actually need to give some time for the audience participation. So, as usual, the rules are that keep it brief, keep it direct, short. Yeah, whoever has the mic can go first. Yeah. I should say whoever has the more working mic goes first.
Okay, yeah, I'm Shafat Yusuf. I teach at the Symbiosis School of International Studies. Yeah, my question is regarding India's participation in Middle East. Regarding this IMEC, for example, many factors don't depend on how India plays. Many factors depend on what is going on in the Middle East. So that means India's involvement in the Middle East would also go along. But as we see, for example, the recent Saudi Arabia, Iran, kind of peace deal, China was more active there. So if any of the panelists could answer this, is India's participation as a rising power, as a power, regional power, going along, what are its interests like in IMEC? And also, alongside that, India's strategic autonomy and its independent foreign policy. In IMEC, how India would like it to have it, because in IMEC, it's the Western interests also in containing China and Western European interests, US interests also.
Okay.
So how India is dealing
So,
and having a strategic
sure.
autonomy.
So,
Thank you.
Kumaran, can India be even more proactive in being brokering peace, or I don't know, in taking IMEC, driving IMEC?
You know, in terms of driving IMEC, I think we are talking to all the participants. In terms of conditions in Israel, Gaza, other issues in the Middle East, we do talk to all our partners and convey our views on matters that are relevant to us. I'm not sure we can talk very much in detail on that, but broadly, you did mention, Dr. Anade, that we run a very complex, multi-layered foreign policy, and people very often express surprise on how we are able to bring multiple partners into the equation. It's something that many countries cannot understand. But there are pieces that can work despite immediate challenges in the Middle East. We anyway want to enhance our connectivity with the Gulf region, with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, etc. And it makes sense for us to go ahead first with that piece and hope that conditions improve in time for the rest of the pieces to fall in place.
I must mention, since Ambassador Kumaran is reminded that as we speak about Saudi-India relations, in fact, India has signed a 25-year treaty with Qatar for gas supply, which will take care of something like 40% of India's gas needs. So while we are talking about, Qatar is not part of IMEC, so I think it's quite an amazing balancing act that we have managed to do. Any other question?
Yeah, hello. Myself, Neha, and I'm a research scholar from the Department of Civics and Politics, University of Mumbai. Actually, I have two questions. One is related to India, ASEAN, and the second, which is India and Middle East. So first of all, yeah, we did very tremendous efforts to India-ASEAN relations in the context of economic cooperations and FTA. But India and ASEAN, particularly the specific countries, is quite worry. For example, India-Malaysia relations, we are still facing lots of trade deficits. And recently, palm oil issue, India and Singapore, the same, the immigrant issue in 2005. On the other side, we talked about the India and the Middle East. So I need to focus on GCC, which is Gulf Cooperative Councils. So actually, the foreign direct investment is dominating by the UAE and the Bahrain. And I think so we are still the part of the negotiations for the FTA with the GCC. So why we are not focusing on bilateral relations instead of we are jump into the multilateral or the multi-cooperation? Thank you.
Okay. So maybe the ASEAN question, Anita Prakash.
Yeah, thank you. The answer is not very complicated here. Look, with Malaysia, the issue is not so much about trade as it is about some non-trade issues. My friends in the diplomatic circle know better about it. And no, Malaysia was the first country she mentioned. So on those, we can have a separate conversation altogether. And there are certain red lines in our governance process and our policy processes, which India does not allow any country to cross as much as possible, and economic relations, So with Malaysia, that's the situation. However, what is happening with Singapore, what's happening elsewhere, these are simple issues which occur with any country with which you are, which you don't have an ease of trading, which includes goods and people altogether. So it's more like getting institutions in place, refining the institutions. The ATIGA is under review at this point of time, and we hope some good results will come out of that. But other than that, ASEAN-India relations, and in particular relations with countries like the palm oil issue was more Indonesia's domestic politics, which happened to influence, because India is the largest importer of palm oil from Indonesia, just after EU. So that was more of, the issue was on the Indonesian side, and it was not a bilateral issue per se. But because of India's huge need for palm oil, that's how it turned out to be.
Dr. Alvai, about the GCC.
Yeah, I think your question regarding the bilateral and the multilateral, and also with regard to GCC,
Yeah.
I think we are doing fairly well in terms of our bilateral relationships with almost all the GCC countries. You can see the trade volume going up than ever before. With UAE, we have signed the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which again has shot up the, the target in the next couple of years is about 100 billion. But if you look at the bilateral trade between Saudi and India, it's about 56.2 or $3 billion in 2023. With UAE, it's about 76.2, so which is a very substantial, handsome amount of bilateral trade. The FTA negotiations are still going on with regard to, and that's very important to look into the region holistically. That is something which we, as compared, again, we tend to compare ourselves with what the Chinese are doing in the region also. Even the Chinese are also kind of figuring out what's to be done with the GCC in terms of the trade. Of course, they are much higher than us, but we need to have a kind of a very holistic approach to deal with the region also, not only bilaterally. We need to engage we need to step up our engagements with GCC, Arab League, and many other regional forums, so that we know the region not only bilaterally but also regionally. So I would say that we are doing fairly well, and with the kind of a goodwill, given by the leaderships from almost all the countries in the region, the future looks very promising. So just to give one couple of updates with regard to the IMEC, all of us since last evening, we were a little clueless about what's to be, spoken during the session, because we often talk about lack of information with regard to developments. I had this discussion with Mbawali sir also like last week about the lack of information in terms of where we are heading. There are few developments in the last couple of months with regard to IMEC. The latest being the intergovernmental framework agreement signed between India and the UAE to push the corridor project. And then we also have France, for that matter, has been coming out very strongly supporting the IMEC. Emmanuel Macron just the last month, selected appointed a special envoy to look into the execution of the IMEC. And we also seen some developments in this state where we are sitting right now to construct a port. Now we are waiting for some clearances from the environment-related authorities. So these are some of the developments with regard to the IMEC developments.
In fact, the Haifa port, the winning bid was by an Indian company, as you know. So actually, and incidentally, the IMEC, some of the delicate issues, they are predicated on Saudi-Israeli relations being more cordial. But the medium to longer term view on that, Ambassador Kumaran?
The Saudis are modernizing and changing their society in many ways that was unthinkable some years ago. There is also huge amounts of investments to modernize the Saudi economy. NEOM is envisaging an investment of $500 billion. So surely, with that kind of ambition, I'm sure they are looking at serious paradigm shifts in the way they look at their neighbors, in fact, all their neighbors, including Israel. We just have to wait for the right kind of conditions to come up. I'm sure, in the next few months, we will see some kind of an accommodation, some kind of a deal on hostages will probably turn things around, and obviously, political developments in countries concerned can also help improve conditions in the region.
In fact, it's quite amazing that there's a very positive and noticeable tilt of India's foreign policy towards Israel at a time when our relationship with the Emirates and Saudi and even Qatar are also strengthening. This is just it's a kind of a really some kind of a magic formula, but that's the India's diplomatic success. But I'm glad you reminded that India's foreign policy, the number one rule is strong GDP growth in India. I mean, that is sort of a precondition for all of this, because this is the market that's of attraction.
Just one couple of sentences, Dr. Anade. I think the India-EU free trade agreement that we are negotiating, that will also make a strong argument in favor of this corridor. In fact, both will be mutually reinforcing, and also the fact that we are looking at multiple other FTAs, all that will pull in some kind of support.
What's the process? Because I wanted to actually, maybe this, I know we are running out of time, but you see the signatories to the IMEC also include EU. It's not just Italy, France, and Germany, but also EU. And I find that the most reluctant partner or slow-moving partner is actually EU. So what's the prospect for EU's FTA? Because they also stand to benefit from this trade, commerce, and logistic linkage.
True, the negotiations with the EU are always very complicated. There are multiple offensive and defensive interests when it comes to trade between India and the EU. There are also issues relating to services trade and investment protection. There's still a long way to go on that. Both sides are working hard, but
I thought it's only wines and automobiles. That's
no. There are. It's a little more complicated than that. But I think a good logistics corridor will make a case for a faster FTA to be concluded, and the other way around.
So I think we've run out of time. But on balance, it looks like IMEC has bright prospects despite what's going on currently, because we need to take a medium to longer term view. And the developments are all in favor of this IMEC project actually being realized. And as was pointed out by several speakers, this is not just a logistic connection, it is also trade, commerce, digital, and financial linkages. So I think there's many parts to it which can work. So thank you all to the panelists, and thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Great final panel. Can I request Ambassador Sudhir Devre to come up on the stage? He's a member of PIC, and we'll ask him to felicitate our guests and give them a token of appreciation. Big round of applause. Ambassador Kumaran. And Dr. Alvait Singh Nigdojam. And of course, our able moderator for the session, Dr. Ajit Ranade. Thank you all so much. Okay, well, as we say goodbye to day 2 of our conference, we have embarked on a journey of sector insights, delving deep into the intricacies of innovation, technology, diplomacy, and economic corridors that are shaping the future landscape of the Asian community, as well as the global community and connectivity. From exploring the transformative power of generative AI, it seems like a long time ago this morning, to discussing India's pivotal role in information technology and digital diplomacy, we've traversed through sessions that have ignited our imaginations and stimulated our intellect. We've envisioned the future of automobiles, pondered on the revolutionary impact of drones, and delved into the profound implications just now of initiatives like the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. Well, get ready to dive into stimulating discussions tomorrow morning that promise to ignite your curiosity and inspire action even further. So join us on a journey of reimagining and revitalizing the World Trade Organization. With an esteemed panel, we'll explore groundbreaking ideas to shape the future of global trade. Then brace yourselves for a deep dive into the realm of critical and emerging technologies, where we'll unravel the mysteries of securing our future. Get ready to explore the cutting-edge innovations that will redefine our world. We will then fly into the next session on expanding regional connectivity. We'll chart a course towards a more integrated South Asia. And finally, join us for the grand finale, the valedictory session, where we'll wrap up our conference with a bang, celebrating the insights gained and the connections made. So a gentle reminder to all of you, set your alarms and your calendars right, because as they say, time flies when you're discussing the future. So let's make a pact to be here on time tomorrow, ready to dive into our final day of the Asia Economic Dialogue. Thank you very much. This is Vandana Saxena Poria signing out. Bye-bye.